This is Geek Gab with your host, me, Daddy Warpig. I am back. Geek Gab for Monday, May 11th, 2026. And surprisingly enough, we did not have any technical problems getting set up for the show today, but to my great embarrassment, I tweeted out earlier today that we were going to be reviewing Westworld, the HBO series, on the show today. And then I abruptly realized right after that I did not have time to watch the final 3 episodes of the series before the show began tonight. And so I'm going to have to get to that next week. So I've got 3 more series, 3 more episodes to go before I finish the series, before I can actually review it. So we're bumping that a week. And that leaves me with what would have been the emergency backup review for tonight if I ran out of things to talk about with Westworld that has been abruptly and unceremoniously promoted to the main review, which is a mockumentary billed as a found footage film, but it is not a found footage film. It's a mockumentary called SAVAGELAND. And I'm going to get to that in just a second, or a minute, or several minutes, or 10 or 15, whatever. I'm going to get to that later, because we're going to start off today by talking about news. And the news that's been going around for the last day or two, but especially today, is about a video game. And you can't see my fingers, but I'm using the biggest air quotes I am possibly capable of using, given that I'm sitting in a chair. If I was standing up, I would be reaching all the way up to the ceiling and starting my fingers there and then going all the way down to the ground to make my air quotes as big as possible. If I had a stadium filled with 100,000 people, I would have every one of those people do air quotes just like that in a massive wave all the way around the stadium. That would be the size of the air quotes I would put around the word game or video game for mixtape. I haven't played it. It's 3 hours long. That would require me having a platform that it's available on and require me then to spend money on it. And although I have an Xbox, I have money, but money does not wish to purchase this game, okay? My money does not want to leave my wallet in the general direction of the Xbox Games Store. I even have in my possession, because of points or the rewards, whatever, a $50 gift certificate on the Xbox Game Store that I have garnered from buying other things and playing games frequently and stuff. And that money, that is free, or that is available as an adjunct to money I was going to be spending anyway. That bonus cash that was delivered unto me as a consumer rewards program. That free money does not wish to spend itself on mixtape. So you may think that it is a bit unfair that I am talking down mixtape without playing it and giving it a review. To that, I will counter with 3 important points. 1, I'm not billing this as a review. It's news and I'm covering it. 2, I am only going to be talking about the parts of the game that I have seen on Twitter and can thus judge those parts I've seen and cover them as news. And 3, all of the ass kissing that the so-called games journalists, once again, air quotes, from the top of the ceiling to the bottom of the store in a giant wave, if you remember the wave, in sports stadiums of 100,000 people around the entire stadium, that many air quotes around the word games journalist. A hyper wave of air quotes, if you will. A hyper wave of air quotes to the max. Games journalists have been ass kissing like they had stage 4 metastatic pancreatic cancer, and the only thing that would save their lives is kissing the ass of the person who made this game. That's how much ass kissing is going on. And they're all giving it straight 10 out of 10s. Whereas regular people playing this thing are saying not only is it not good, it is not even technically a game. It is not a video game. It is a 3-hour movie with some quick time events that don't really affect the narrative. Which sounds like to me you could sit down on your couch watching a real movie, and so long as you had a clapper, every now and then clapping on and off the lights in your living room, because you get the same level of interactivity. You're doing something, the lights are turning on, the lights are turning off, and the narrative is flowing on unimpeded. Now, that may be unfair. I freely admit that may be unfair, but as news is covering it, that's what people who are regular people who regularly play games, that's what they're describing it as. A narrative where there are occasional quick time events that don't actually affect the story. So it is not technically a game, it's a visual novel with minimal interactivity. So, one of the parts I saw was the very end of the game in which the girl is ranting, the main character is ranting, and she's saying these overly melodramatic things about how her dad is such a terrible person, which just, of course she is, because that's what all the media since the year, I don't know, 2000, but especially since 2012 has been. I hate you, Dad. There's an entire political movement that seems to be based around the central core moral tenet of I hate you, Dad. And I mean, I know there are bad fathers out there. I do. I understand that. I happen to have a great father. I have a fantastic father, and I am grateful for that. I recognize that I am fortunate. But all these people whose entire lives are organized around getting vengeance on their fathers, getting revenge on their fathers. There was a time when I was a teenager that I had a lot of resentment and anger towards my dad, but I outgrew it. I got over it. And I am proud of my father. I saw who he was as I was growing up, as I was getting older, and I matured out of it. And if you haven't matured out of that, or you don't mature out of that, things are, you need to figure out how to put the past behind you, because there are a lot worse things that most people can go through than having a dad who tells you you're doing things wrong when you're a teenager, or who's kind of distant. Besides which, forgiveness will unburden your soul anyway. Forgiveness isn't for the people you're angry at. Forgiveness is for you. It makes you feel better. It lifts burdens off your soul. Because being constantly angry at someone is like a canker sore in your mouth. It just always, always hurts. And it continues to be there for no good reason, because forgiving them lets that heal. And it doesn't change their lives, doesn't make their lives better, but it makes your life immensely better. And religion used to teach this. Churches used to teach this. And a large part of people who don't go to church, or who stop going to church, or whose parents stopped going to church, so they never had a chance to grow up, never learned this. And so they just keep on gathering new resentments and gathering new enemies. And then their life just keeps on getting more and more miserable. And it's very sad to see. Anyways, this main character very clearly hates her father, and she's saying things that are just incredibly melodramatic, and they are melodramatic in a really, really particular and weird way. And every time she makes a statement, there's a big sting of music. Oh, one of the things about this, it's called mixtape. And one of the things about it is music. And they paid a lot of money for this small, teeny, tiny, supposedly indie game. Turns out that the girl who made it, her dad is really just insanely off the charts rich. So it's possible. I don't know the story, so I don't know for sure, but the comments I've seen have said that her father had a lot to do with the funding. They got a ton of music that is really expensive and hard to get, like 2 songs from the original Transformers soundtrack from 1986, and other big name songs. But after each line she says, there's this big musical sting, and then it zooms in on her. So I want to read these. I want you to understand to her father. I want you to understand she's set something afire. Like in the middle of a forest, she set something afire. It's burning. She's holding this lighter. I want you to understand this ain't a catastrophe. Okay, and then there's a big sting and it zooms in. Daddy, if you trap me here, this will only be the beginning of my wicked ways. Again, delivered in the worst possible way that you could possibly deliver this terrible line. And then she, because I'm angry and I'm wired and I'm fixing for a whole lotta trouble. If you make me stay here, I'm going to burn the whole effing place down. Only she doesn't sing effing. Uh, and it's the vibe, right? It gives wasted youth vibes. If you remember the album Bat Out of Hell 2 from the 90s, there was a clip in there where Meatloaf hollers a rant at his dad. And it's about youthful rebellion and the dad misunderstanding him. And it goes like this. I remember, and he's just yelling this. This isn't music. He's not singing it. It's just spoken, and it's just a little piece before the next song. Everything louder than everything else starts. I remember everything. I remember every little thing as if it only happened yesterday. I was barely 17 and I once killed a boy with a Fender guitar. I don't remember if it was a Telecaster or a Stratocaster, but I do remember that it had a heart of chrome and a voice like a horny angel. I don't remember if it was a Telecaster or a Stratocaster, but I do remember that it wasn't at all easy. It required the perfect combination of the right power chords and the precise angle from which to strike. The guitar bled for about a week afterwards, and the blood was zoot, dark and rich, like wild berries. The blood of the guitar was chuckberry red. The guitar bled for about a week afterwards, but it rung out beautifully, and I was able to play notes that I had never heard before. So I took my guitar and I smashed it against the wall, and I smashed it against the floor, and I smashed it against the body of a varsity cheerleader, smashed it against the hood of a car, smashed it against the 1981 Harley Davidson. The Harley howled in pain, the guitar howled in heat, and I ran upstairs to my parents' bedroom. Mommy and Daddy were sleeping quietly in the moonlight. Slowly I opened the door, creeping into the shadows, right up to the foot of the bed. I raised the guitar high above my head, and just as I was about to bring the guitar crashing down upon the center of the bed, my dad woke up screaming, "Stop! Wait a minute! Stop it, boy! What do you think you're doing? That's no way to treat an expensive musical instrument." And I said, "Gosh darn it, Daddy." That's not what the lyrics are, but you know I love you, but you've got a hell of a lot to learn about rock and roll. And then it goes into the next song, Everything Louder, about everything else. Okay. This piece of the game reads like someone is trying to do that monologue from Wasted Youth. They're trying to build up to some fantastic original song. There is original music in the game. They're trying to build up to this incoherent, inchoate rock and roll rebellion, And they can't pull it off for two reasons. One, it was not written by Jim Steinman, who wrote Bat Out of Hell, the original album, and Bat Out of Hell 2, Back into Hell. Jim Steinman was a genius. He wrote these grand operatic pieces that, frankly, very few other people could get away with it. Queen only tried it once with Bohemian Rhapsody and never did it again. And he wrote whole albums like this. And he was a great writer, a great songwriter. Nobody else can get away with doing what Jim Steinman can. So the game fails. The so-called game fails. The alleged game fails. And two, it's not being said by Meatloaf. Okay? If your Jim Steinman lyrics like this are not being sung or spoken by a person with the kind of innate sense, with the natural talent for bombast, for awesome expression of lyrics, for the ability to infuse such seemingly silly lyrics with seriousness and not gravitas, but with such a sense of grandeur, that he can pull it off and Meatloaf could, then you're not going to be able to pull off a wasted youth moment. This game had a wasted youth moment. This alleged game had a wasted youth moment, and it could not pull it off. Wasted time, okay? It just could not pull it off. So, me reporting to you what I've seen about this game is it's trying for a grandeur moment at the climax, this moment of ridiculously overblown, over-the-top grandeur, and it just can't pull it off. So, the other thing I've seen is a bit from the middle of the game where they're on a road trip and alternative rock music is playing, and the songs are all from different genres of music. Alternative rock music, before I do this, they have a tape, a cassette tape, an old tape from back in the days, and they show someone who's rewinding the entire tape with a pencil. And someone has a picture of this listing the multitudinous problems with this. One, you never rewind a tape with the pencil because it takes forever. You only just turn it a little bit to get maybe a loose little, when the tape itself comes loose a bit, you turn it to get it tight, to sit tightly on the rollers. You rewind a tape in the tape player if you have to, or you flip it over and play the other side. That's why tapes have other sides. Two, the top, where you put the tape in the machine and it goes past the metal bits inside the machine so the machine can read the magnetic charges, so it can read the music and play it, so it plays the music. It's solid. There's no gaps there. The machine can't read the tape. Two, they're not rewinding it. Supposedly the tape is played all the way through, but they're not rewinding it. They're going the wrong direction. They're going the wrong direction. There are some other mistakes. I don't remember them all. I just remember those. News. That's what I've seen in this game. They did not take the time to get the physical mechanics of a cassette tape right for a game, for an alleged game, the entire title of which is called mix tape, as in cassette tape. The concept of a mixtape. That's why they got a bunch of different songs. It's from a mixtape. The concept of a cassette tape is central to the alleged game. But they couldn't even take the time to get the cassette tape right. That is a lack of discipline. That is a lack of exactitude. That is a lack of craft that is frankly embarrassing. So, I'm going to leave that alone. I think the graphical style is hideous. I just don't like it. And they're going for I can't even remember the name now. The name shot right out of my head. That game where you rewind time, that was also a small indie game that's kind of had the same aura of this. Life is Strange. Life is Strange, which actually was a game. It was not an alleged game. It was a game. They're going for that kind of style of artwork, that same kind of vibe. It's immediately obvious when you look at it. And the characters are kind of dressed the same, and they're alternative characters and such. But they did it badly. My opinion, they did it badly. So the last thing that I saw about this game was in the middle of about this alleged game was in the middle or early on in the progress. They're doing a drive and listening to an alt rock song. And they're listening to the music and doing this headbanging thing. And then they pull in through a drive-thru and they're ordering fake food that they've made up. And then they're driving, you know, those little highway bumps that make loud clicking sounds when you drive over them, of the exact kind that they didn't yet have in the early and mid 90s, because that's when the alleged game is set in the 90s. I believe that's what they said. They're doing that, and the driver is deliberately driving on them to make the car jitter in time to the music. And here's the problem this scene gives me. It's as if the person making this, the girl who designed it, who went through two different development teams, two whole entire different development teams, fired one, started another one. It's as if they have seen good things. Not good games, mind you, good things. Like the headbanging scene in Wayne's World, the first Wayne's World movie. Because the car, the shape of the car, the shot, the angles, they just really look exactly like it, or they strongly reminiscent of it. And it's like they've seen good things and they're copying good things. But it's just not good. Now, everybody, when they're starting off making stuff, copies other things that came before. Writers are heavily influenced by writers that came before them, and then they grow into their own voice. Painters learn to paint by copying painters who came before them, and then they develop their own style. It is, and I'm not saying absolutely everybody does this, but it is a very common thing among artists that you have someone or a group of someone's that you admire, that you love their work, and you start off learning by imitating it or duplicating it or whatever. And then as time goes on, you develop your own style that is you. And the virtue of you doing this is when you do this, you suck. So nobody sees your work because it's crap. And then by the time you have developed your own style, hopefully it's better. You're doing good work by then. If you have talent, you will someday do great work. The problem with this game is I'm watching these scenes, and there is no evidence that this is a talented person early in their career. See, the problem with this game is this is a person who has not moved past the copying other people stage, and yet they've produced this game that, thanks to an infusion of cash from their dad, reviewers got these big like gift boxes, which is not unusual. Lots of reviewers get them with like CD players in them and other stuff related to the game. Later on, she goes and burns a CD at a time in which CD burners were $1,000 or more, and it was devilishly difficult to assemble songs and put them on a CD. So the game is, like I said, lack of craft, lack of exactitude. So it is unfortunate that they had so much money available to them to subsidize this supposedly indie game, that they got on everybody's radar before they had a chance to get out of their copying other good people phase. Because most people get through that when they're small and unknown and nobody gets to see it. They're called trunk novels for writers, obviously. If you called a sculptor's ugly piece where he was trying to copy Michelangelo a trunk novel, trying to copy Da Vinci a trunk novel, I think people would seriously think you're crazy. But the additional problem is that it doesn't seem to be the work of someone who is new to the profession, but who has a unique vision. There is no personality. There is nothing distinct. There is nothing unique about it. It's just all, the heart of it is things we've seen before. It's not just what's going on screen, but the meaning of what's going on screen is run of the mill. It's tried, it's been done so many times before. Dustboard, which was awful, at least had a unique idea. It had something off the wall and bizarre. It was tainted because of its obsessive need to push its political message, but at least had a unique idea, something new, or at least if they took those ideas from some other inspiration from some other source, they turned it into something new. And this game doesn't have anything like that. Where is the heart of the maker in this game? Where is their personality? Where is their soul? It doesn't seem to be there. I'm not saying they don't have heart. I'm not saying they don't have personality, But part of talent, not all of talent, but part of talent is being able to bring across the uniqueness that is you and make it show up in your work. And sometimes there are people who can't do that. And sometimes there are people who just don't hold enough interesting views or have enough interesting thoughts. Like they say, they don't have anything to say. That seems to be the problem in this game. Is the person who made it doesn't have anything interesting to say. This alleged game. So, let's go to SAVAGELAND. Do the people who made SAVAGELAND have anything interesting to say? Let me wrap up real quick on Mixtape. Can I review it and give it a score? No, I can't review it and give it a score. All I can say is the bits and pieces I have seen are enough for me to deduce that the rest of the alleged game is probably just as low quality because the way it is bad is not bad in superficial ways. It is bad in fundamental ways that tie back to the talent and the vision and the inspiration of the person making it. They don't seem to have brought anything into the table, either in terms of mechanics or in terms of how enjoyable the game is or in terms of having something grabby to put forward that would make it worth buying and playing. So, SAVAGELAND. Not to be confused with the Savage Worlds role-playing game, tabletop role-playing game, which I'm suddenly paranoid I may have used that term earlier in the show. Doesn't matter. SAVAGELAND. I read the description of it. I knew exactly what it was going to be, and I was not wrong. I read a one-sentence description, and off the basis of that, less than 10 words, I knew exactly what this movie was going to be, and I was not wrong. It is a small town. I'm reading the description because I can't pull up Fossum on my computer, but a small town down on the border of Mexico in Arizona. And the entire town is savagely murdered overnight. All 50 some odd people living in the town are not only savagely murdered, but their bodies disappear. They're gone. And the only survivor is an illegal alien. And this is in the description. They describe him as an illegal alien. And this illegal alien is accused of the crime of mass murdering this entire town. Now, if you're like me and you are old and you have and you are old and cynical because you have seen so many movies, seen so many TV shows, read so many book blurbs, seen it again and again and again. You know immediately what is coming in the movie. The illegal alien is utterly innocent. All the white people are racists, and it is probably the fault of the white people that all this is happening. And the movie is not going to be about this massacre. It's not going to be about this implied supernatural massacre. It's going to mostly be about grinding the axe of a grinding the axe, the political axe that the people who made the movie have to grind. So, am I correct in that? I was absolutely correct in that. About a third of the movie is all about grinding the political axe of illegal immigrants and how they're oppressed and how all the white people are racist against Hispanic people, in specific Mexican people, because this is on the border of Arizona and Mexico, and the illegal immigrants in this area are, at least at the time this movie was made, which is 11 years ago, are largely Mexican. And they do mention that there are cartel murders. The movie does not pretend that everything that these people are saying is false. They don't pretend that there isn't they acknowledge there is a problem with cartel violence. They acknowledge that there are horrific things that go on around the border and all of these other things. So it is not as if the movie completely omits those things, but it spends about a third of the movie pushing this point of view of the white people in this area just being racist bigots. So I'm not giving anything away. This is not spoilers, because this is about the movie, and frankly, anything past a year is already beyond a spoiler statute of limitations. And the fact of the matter is, there is a huge mystery about what really happened in this town, and the details are very, very slim. They're very, very slender. And they don't line up exactly with any given movie monster. Maybe, yes, what happened to this town could have been zombies, or it could have been werewolves, or it could have been vampires like in 30 Days of Night, or it could have been unique monsters that don't really fit into the mold of any of that. There are no answers. You don't ever see any of the events that they describe happen on screen. This is a documentary made in the aftermath, the long aftermath, over a year after the events took place. And we don't see any bodies of the monsters. We don't, the victims are largely gone. There are only pieces of the bodies left. They're only able to identify 6 people who are survivors of this, or not survivors, they're dead, whose bodies are left behind. Everything else is gone, just gone. Pieces of flesh and skin and blood in fields, on roads, inside people's houses. Something swept through this tiny town just over the border from Mexico and wiped it off the map. So the question is the other 2/3 of the movie worth watching? Yes, this would be a great movie if you went through and changed or deleted all of the racism. If you, or just changed it to be actually plausible to match the real attitudes of real people in Arizona. See, the problem with it is it's preachy. It does not reflect the real attitudes of real people in the real world. It is just a straw man. It is just a parody of the people in the border. And so it's clear that the filmmakers have grudges, people they hate. And they're just carrying out this hatred against largely men. I'm sure there may be one or two of them, but most of the people they're interviewing who are the evil racists are white men. And most of them, or much of them, have some kind of facial or overweight or whatever. So anyways, what happened is that this small town is a poor city where gardeners, babysitters, pool boys for a bigger town, all of whom are specifically Mexican, not Hispanic, specifically Mexican, many of whom, not all of them, many of whom are illegal immigrants, illegal aliens, but not all of them, work at a closer town, a close town where the sheriff is, where the deputies are, and where all the white people live. 57 inhabitants in a town called Sangre de Cristo. So the Hinksville, something like that. The main character, the illegal immigrant, is a gardener for a particular family, who's a white family, who is the preacher, his wife, and his kids, who came into this small town of Sangre de Cristo to take a church that had been completely abandoned and ruined and rebuild it, repaint it, and start having church services for the Hispanic community so they could go to church on Sunday instead of having to drive all the way to the other town. He was well known in the town. He was well liked. And he was also an amateur photographer who was not without some talent. He had some talent. Maybe not huge professional talent, but it is said during the movie, a professional photographer who they interview, and again, it's a mockumentary. They assemble video interviews, film interviews from people. They assemble newscast reports, clips of newscasts, and they assemble photographs from the one roll of film this amateur photographer, who was the only survivor, had with him. He had a camera, an old-fashioned camera with film, not a digital camera, and he took 36 photographs. They're a little bit fuzzy on that. They say at one point it was 36 photographs, but they end up showing 37. And they show you most of his photographs. His photographs are taken at night without a flash. And they're taken during moments of quick, intense action. And the intense action causes what's going on to be blurred. And so it's very hard to tell what's going on in specific detail, but the general what is actually happening in terms of the wide details are absolutely clear. You can absolutely tell that people are getting attacked. You can absolutely tell that there are bodies that are missing body parts. You can absolutely tell there is blood all over the streets. You can absolutely tell that these creatures, because there's not a flash photography going on, that either their eyes are glowing or their eyes are being reflected in lights, either street lights or lights of houses or whatever. And he is running from his house where he first encounters this phenomenon after it's already begun. He is not there for the beginning of it. He is not there for the beginning of the slaughter. And by the time he reaches the main part of town, many people are already dead. And people are in the process of getting their houses broken into, getting doors kicked down, and getting eaten or attacked in the middle of the streets. This is a horror film. By the way, if I haven't made that clear, it's a horror film. And they go, and he is taking pictures all along his run of what's going on. And they have a professional photographer who they interview later. They're asking, why would he be doing that? And he describes his time in Vietnam and his time as a war photographer and what he did and why he did it during wartime. And why a photographer who is used to taking pictures would do that. And it's a really good explanation, and you could completely buy why this person is taking pictures instead of getting into combat, because everyone who's getting into combat with these creatures is getting killed. There is no escaping them. But he is making a record of what happened so anyone who comes after him can witness what's going on. And we learn later in the movie that this started as a few bodies going missing and some weird things happening south of the border in Mexico. And that these creatures are just going directly north or going in a general northerly direction for one reason or another. And so they started in Mexico as a small thing, and the phenomenon is getting, when they hit a town, this is the first town that we know of that they hit, they just wiped it out, even though it's a small town. And then we find out, again, later in the movie, that they headed through a park, 2 national parks north of that, where a bunch of people were disappeared and were chopped, bits and pieces of them were left, but they mostly disappeared, and they hit the edges of a Utah town, and 12 people disappeared there. And so they're just heading north. They also talk about the border wall, which I want to get back to a little bit later. And so he captures this series of images of all these horrifying things going on. The people in the town are very, very poor, and none of them have cell phones to call with. And so nobody in the town is able to get out a call while this is going on. And it starts at sundown and goes on overnight. And then by the next day, the sheriff and the deputies all find out what's going on and everything, that the entire town has disappeared. They find this one guy there covered with the blood of like 6 different victims. And it looks like he's done it, because he's the only survivor and everybody else is dead, even though it's impossible to believe that one man could physically kill 57 people. There's 8 people who escaped up a water tower, and they, having gotten up the water tower, the father and his family, they all jumped from the water tower to their deaths rather than face whatever was going on in the town. The last place he stops, this photographer stops, is at a preschool, and he tries to get into the preschool, and all the doors are locked, but there are creatures inside the preschool. Apparently, the teacher in there locked the doors after some of them got in, and there's a massacre inside with the 7 children and the teacher. And this preacher and his wife and his son all died in the church. And the last survivor in the preschool is the daughter of the preacher. The photographer is a gardener, worked for the preacher, helping him clean up the church, do the groundskeeping, landscaping, things like that. And these creatures are coming after her, and he finally turns on his flash. He's taking flash photography pictures of this little girl, 3 of them. 36 pictures total, but 3 of them are of this little girl as she's screaming, trying to get out the barred window of this preschool as the creatures are closing in. And he says he turned on, they have video of him being interviewed by a prison psychiatrist. He took the 3 pictures because he thought the flash would drive them away and save the little girl, but it only delays the end by a few seconds. So we don't see what happens to her. That's not on screen. We don't see what happens to the children, but we see the photos of the cleanup of the preschool. We see pictures of, little kids' drawings and crayon on the walls and blood splattered on them, and pictures of shoes of these kids on the floor and blood pooled on the floor and splashed on the shoes, things like that. I think they must have used an abandoned town in California, because that's where it was shot, because they were very, very specific about the geometry of the town, about the timeline of his journey, about where he was at specific moments, about what direction the photos are taking and where they're looking, and where specific geographic features are. And it's all very grounded. It's all very well done as far as giving you a sense of time and place where this man is moving and what's going on. It is a well done movie. It is very skillfully done. The pictures in the movie are chilling. It's all, other than the third of it that is a rabid political polemic. It is an incredibly well done movie. If they had just left out the rabid political polemic, it would have been nearly perfect. I can't think of anything they could have done to make it better, other than make it about something other than lecturing people about border security and why, and saying that anybody who wants border security is evil and hates illegal immigrants. Here's the thing. This is the last thing I have to say about a critique of the movie. The more you try to force one specific interpretation of an audience of an artistic work on your audience, the bigger the chance that you will end up reinforcing the exact opposite point of view. The last 10 minutes of the movie accidentally and inadvertently end up being an advertisement for the border fence that they talk about early in the movie. Because if the border fence had been in place, these creatures would never have gotten over the border from Mexico and would never have attacked this little town. They would have been safe with the border fence in place, whatever these creatures were. So the movie ends up inadvertently making the case for the very thing it intended to attack. And you know how they say that orcs represent they say that orcs represent racial minorities. They represent because all of the stereotypes about racial minorities are present in orcs. Therefore, orcs are really represent racial minorities. Well, all of the things they're putting in the white people's mouths in this movie about how illegal immigrants come across the border and massacre people. Okay. The point of the movie is that if they hadn't been racist and they had listened to this illegal immigrant when he told them that these were monsters and were not, and it wasn't him. If they'd listened to him and gone looking for the monsters, they would have found the monsters and stopped them, and they wouldn't be on this trek north and murdering people additionally north. That's the point of the movie. Racists didn't listen to an illegal immigrant, and so people are dying. Fine. But what they're really doing is they are making these monsters into brutal murderers who are inevitably heading north. So these people themselves have done the orc thing. They have made their monsters, by their own logic, into illegal immigrants. And so all the people they're attacking the whole movie, they've just proved them right. When you go so far one way that you accidentally end up proving your opponents right, that's what happens. First, that's an epic fail. Epic fail. But that's what happens when you're trying to force one specific interpretation down people's throats. All you had to do was just had it play out and not try to pound people over the head with your interpretation. Just give everybody involved in the movie their own say. Stop claiming it was racism. I mean, at one point, they go into how Arizona enthusiastically welcomed the KKK and during Reconstruction, and they have a black author of nonfiction books who they're interviewing say that he thinks it was the KKK in a bunch of masks, that it wasn't really some supernatural monsters, which it could have been. There's not enough evidence that this is a supernatural event in the movie itself, there's just some rumors that they kind of link up that may or may not actually physically really be associated with these events. If you were looking at this, like, if you were judging this not by the standards of being a movie, but by the standards of being an actual documentary in the real world, you could look at it and say, no, those are completely, they haven't proven that. They haven't established that. There is not enough evidence here to draw that conclusion. So he could be right. But that's just another point where they're saying, you know, white people are racist. So this movie was another movie that was almost absolute genius. Like The Devil Wears Prada 1, I talked about last week. This was almost genius. It had skill, it had a vision, it carried out what was going on, it had good bit players who, when they were interviewed, they had a lot of bit players. The sister of the illegal immigrant in Mexico, various family members of the victims, deputies, the sheriff, the mayor, the public defender who was defending the illegal immigrant, the psychiatrist from the prison. You know, they had a lot of people in this movie, all of whom gave credible performances. It was almost genius, but their axe grinding ruined it. That's the problem with the movie. If you can get past it, there's a lot of good in this movie, a lot of unnerving things, a lot of grotesque things that are worth, if you like zombie type movies that could also be werewolves, that could also be vampires, that could also be something that's sort of like all of them, but not really. There is great stuff here that could have been so much better, and it's disappointing. All right, that's the news. That's the review, and I'm done. I'm done for today. I'm out. I'm done. I am leaving YouTube for today. This has been Geek Gab. I want to thank everyone who listened live. I want to thank everyone who will listen later on this channel. This has been Geek Gab for Monday, May 11th, 2026. We are here just about every week, 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific, youtube.com/GeekGab. Once again, that's youtube.com/GeekGab. I'm your host, Daddy Warpig, signing off for tonight. But don't you worry, don't you fret, I will be back.